Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast, where we chat to founders, creators, and self-starters about how they started and where they are now. I'm your host, Byron Greeley, and today's guest is Mack Grenfell, the founder of Byword. Byword is a platform that helps users generate high-quality AI-written, SEO-optimized articles at scale. It's a very interesting tool, and we get into all the details of how it works in this episode. In the episode, we discuss how Byword started, validating an idea, and the AI landscape and the pace of adoption. It's a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure you will too. Enjoy the show. Hey Mack, thanks for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation, and to get started, could you give us some background on who you are and your entrepreneurial journey so far?
Yeah, sure thing. So as Mac, I run an AI SaaS called Byword that is basically an SEO article generator. So people, brands, websites use it to generate SEO articles, often at scale, to kind of bring in traffic for their sites. I've been running this for around about a year and a half now. Built it essentially on my own, grew out of some of the consulting work that I was doing before when I kind of did this as one-off projects for brands with bits of code here and there. Built that around about sort of autumn 2022 into the tool that is Byword today.
Awesome. And now I'd like to go a little bit deeper into Byword. Could you explain what Byword is and how it all works?
Yeah, sure. So the idea is you sort of come to Byword, sign up and log in. And then the basic flow is that you'll provide either an SEO keyword that you want to rank on. So if you're a mattress company, you might want to rank on keywords around kind of best mattresses or how to get better sleep, etc. Or you provide a kind of pre-written article title, and Byword writes the article for you. There's a lot more sort of complexity to it than that. So there's all sorts of features to kind of custom writing styles, tone of voice, interlinking through to other pages in your site. Byword sort of publishes to your site as well using custom settings, generates AI images, all these sorts of things. But at a very kind of core basic level, it's I want to rank for this keyword on Google search, and then Byword spits out the article that you put on your site that helps you rank for it.
Awesome. And what gave you the idea to start Byword?
So I had been working freelance since around mid-2021. So backgrounds in marketing, I was sort of a marketing consultant, contractor, freelancer, whatever you want to call it. I've been doing a few different things. So mostly working on ads. That was my background. But also was doing a bit of work for a friend's startup where, as is often the case at startups, you're just doing a bit of everything. So I sort of got thrust into some of the SEO side of things. I was even writing a bit of content myself. And there was this famous SEO case study that I'd come across a while ago from a company called Zapier that you might know and listeners might know. For brief background, Zapier is sort of like a workflow automation tool where you can kind of connect apps together, and if this happens in one app, it does another thing in another app. And they had this really famous case study, which was kind of in some ways long before its time, where the idea is if you kind of have Zapier's got thousands of apps, but let's keep it simple. Say it's got 10 apps that you can connect. Things like, whenever you get an email in Gmail that contains this, it posts this thing to Twitter or something like that. Let's say you've got 10 apps. You basically then get a human to kind of go in and write all of the kind of details and fill out all the fields about these 10 apps. And then straight away, you've got 10 landing pages, one for each of these apps that can kind of rank on SEO for, Gmail integrations or Twitter integrations or whatever it is. Where it gets clever is that you don't just have those 10 landing pages, or you don't just have those 10 apps, but you've also got 10 times 9 pairs of apps, because each of those apps can connect with the other ones. And so, again, just from kind of filling out the details for 10 apps, you can make now 90 landing pages that all look like how to connect Gmail to Twitter or Google Sheets to Instagram. And then you can take it even further, and if each app can connect with each other app in on average 5 ways, you've got 90 times 5, so 450 additional landing pages on top of the 90 on top of the 10. And so from just filling out details from these 10 apps, you get 550 landing pages out that are all quite niche as well and like very on target. So Zapier's whole thing is they're trying to sell to people connecting these apps together. And so if someone's searching how to connect Google Sheets to Gmail, and you have a perfect landing page for this, and they're kind of, it's a niche enough search term, they're already kind of down the funnel. You've just got the perfect landing page for them. And of course, Zapier doesn't just have 10 apps. They've got, let's say, 1,000. And I'm not going to do the maths here, but you can see it's quite a lot of landing pages from relatively little work. And so had grown really interested in this and was thinking of ways to apply this to the startup I was working with. And we had an idea that was kind of similar around calculating different financial metrics in different accounting platforms, because they're sort of financy startup. And kind of had the idea. And the problem I kind of foresaw, and I'm sure kind of Zapier ran into some of this as well, is around creating content that's unique enough so Google doesn't penalize it for duplicate content. And it was around this time that GPT-3 had just been coming off of waitlist, or rather I'd been taken off the GPT-3 waitlist. And so I saw this as an interesting experiment of, okay, here's a way we can make some content that's unique for each of these pages. And so that was the kind of first project that I'd worked on using GPT-3 at the time, the kind of very basic old Da Vinci models, to kind of populate some of this data for each of these pages and make sure we had not just lots of pages, I think it was 2,000 in this project, but also that each of them had some kind of unique content to them. So did that project. Results were good, went well. But like you get with a lot of this stuff, because it's going after quite niche search terms, like in the Zapier case, and this was about calculating EBITDA and QuickBooks and stuff like this. It kind of goes for like a lower funnel audience, so it converts relatively well for SEO. But that sort of led to other projects and kind of founders and stuff talking amongst themselves and saying, hey, we're trying this thing, it's pretty cool. And so I kept doing more and more of these projects that were all sort of one-off, and I just kind of build out like bits of code on my side and then run them and generate the pages and then hand them off. And I guess there are like a few cogs turning. So one was with I was doing some work with an Italian startup, and they were running like a little bit of a kind of RFP in terms of like how they wanted to kind of build out their content stack. And it turned out I was the only contractor that they were talking to, and the rest were all like SaaS tools. And they went with me in the end, but nearly didn't, because they basically wanted a tool they could just kind of punch stuff into and get the output rather than working with someone. So that started to get some of the gears turning. Also, it just became, there's a lot more kind of demand for this kind of stuff, and it became pretty clear that I was the limiter in terms of my capacity, and just going back and forth over emails always takes time as well. So I started to think maybe we could really kind of wrap this up if this is just a user interface that people can play around with themselves. And just also the kind of general background rising tide of hype around AI made it feel like by the time I kind of got to work in, I think it was the end of August 2022, it felt like a pretty opportune time to build this into something and to launch it properly.
It's amazing. And while building this product during the hype of AI, did you feel any pressure to move quickly?
Yeah, definitely. So the kind of thing that really lit the fuse eventually was, there is a guy called Nat Friedman who used to run GitHub, and he runs this thing, he runs a few of these sort of similar things, but one's called AI Grants. It has taken various different forms over its life, but basically in August 2022 announced, hey, we're going to, actually I'll give the philosophy behind it first. It's like, hey, at this point, the models have developed very quickly, and the product side hasn't really caught up with the models. So they were basically saying, we're going to write a bunch of $250,000 checks. It's called a sort of MFN safe, which is a very kind of founder-friendly way of raising capital for people who are just building products on top of AI models. And there's I think it was maybe a October 1st deadline or something, I can't remember, but it was sort of a month from when I started, and thought, okay, even if my chances of getting this are quite small, this seems like a pretty good forcing function or incentive to just like get something shipped, even if it's like a demo MVP version by October 1st or whatever the deadline was. So got, pretty much the core product shipped in like a month. Had definitely before that had kind of spent idle time building, Figma designs and stuff like that, but nothing too serious. It definitely helped that there was a lot of code from work that I'd done on some of these contracting products that I could sort of tweak and modify into what became Byword. So definitely, I think because of that and the general just sort of excitement around AI at that time, this is all kind of pre-ChatGPT as well. But it was certainly, it was a good time to rush it. because there was a definitely large increase in interest when ChatGPT came out, and I think it was November of that year.
Yeah, well, that's great. It's a perfect way to force yourself into starting something. And just to clarify, so the back end of Byword is GPT-4, is that correct?
So it's a bunch of different models.
Okay.
There's a lot of use of GPT-4. There's there's lots of different parts of the article writing process, and some of them it makes much more sense to kind of trade off speed and cost. Like you don't need to kind of bring a sledgehammer to everything, which would be the using GPT-4 to everything. But sadly, for the more complex parts, it is more reliant on GPT-4.
Okay, interesting. And how, because I imagine the AI space is very competitive. How do you ensure that your product is different to your competitors? Is there a way to build a moat?
Yeah, so it's definitely, I'd say it's probably harder than in some other industries. There's a few different ways that the moat comes about. So one, because I've been doing this for quite a while, had a kind of range of experience in doing this on SEO projects and kind of results from that. And we've always been quite keen to kind of work with users to build out case studies and showcase data and results there, which I think in a space like AI, where it's still kind of new and there may be some kind of trust issues on the consumer or business side, having that sort of data and case studies is definitely very helpful. I think also one thing that's been really helpful and was quite a conscious decision early on is you'll see a lot of AI tools, particularly in the sort of AI writing space in the broader sense, trying to do pretty much everything. So a lot of them, it's one tool, but there's sort of 100 tools bundled up in that sort of write different like bits of copy and text. And there's a certain user for whom that's quite useful. But certainly with Byword, it's always been extremely focused on just one kind of small ICP or user type, which is someone who wants to generate content at scale for SEO purposes. And so we've always just focused on doing that one thing and doing it really well. And I think that's allowed us to build a bit more technical moat in terms of some of the features and products that we've gone after. So some features like the interlinking feature I mentioned earlier, which sort of looks at your site and understands how to kind of connect articles and link them through to other pages, is quite an advanced feature where I don't know what day this is going out, but probably by the time this goes out, there's another feature around kind of custom writing styles based on like articles already on your site. And so I think, being really narrowly and intentionally focused helps build a bit more of a technical moat than people who are just trying to do everything at once.
And that actually leads me to my next question, because you touched on when you were freelancing, you said there were signs pointing you to the direction of building this, or that there was an opportunity to build a product like this. But with AI and so many people working on it and so much attention, I feel like it's quite easy to fall victim to shiny object syndrome. How did you decide that Byword was the right tool to build and not fall victim or fall into that trap of like building a product that does everything?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I've been somewhat fortunate in terms of the background and the fact I've just been doing this for a year or two as a contractor on these kind of individual projects. And so it was very clear there was a market for it, that people were paying for this. And I felt like I had more experience to focus on this individual problem rather than trying to either focus on like a completely different AI tool in a space where I didn't have experience, or to focus on just like doing lots and lots of things that were semi-adjacent where, again, I didn't have as much experience. So it was definitely a case of, it was quite fortuitous in the sense of just being in the right place at the right time and testing this stuff out early on before it became kind of mainstream, and then having that conviction from selling and working on these projects and just seeing clients being really enthusiastic about it, giving confidence to, okay, this is something that I feel uniquely positioned to build, and it seems like the obvious thing for me to do.
And you were, well, quite early to the whole AI thing. I mean, getting on the wait list for GPT-3, not many people were on the wait list. The attention came as it launched, kind of thing. So what drew you to AI? How did you discover it? And what drew you to the tech?
Yeah, that's a good question. I honestly don't know. If I had to place a bet, it was probably following people on Twitter. I don't even know who. But yeah, I think just very early on, remember spending a lot of time just getting stuck into Playground, the sort of OpenAI API interface, which actually hasn't really changed too much over the years it's been there. I just remember getting on that for the first time and just spending hours just messing around, seeing what it could do and what it couldn't do, and becoming yeah, I wouldn't say obsessed, but very, very like interested in the capabilities there. Yeah, I can't remember the first time I even saw the letters GPT-3 or anything like that.
It's so funny how that works. It's like you just know there's something there, but you're not 100% sure what yet, but you know that you should commit, well, like you said, quite a lot of time to it at the beginning because there's something.
Yeah, you just get a sense that even if there's not something that directly will come out of this just seems super impressive, and an hour or a few hours spent on this seems like it will just pay dividends in the long term somehow, some way.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like the hype of AI has kind of died down a bit, and people are now thinking of more real practical use cases. And I think it's maturing in a sense, is my feeling. But where do you see the future of AI going?
Yeah. So I think certainly if you look at the early days, and I was kind of touching on some of this earlier, you see a lot of tools that do a little bit of everything, not especially well. I think that now people are kind of past the stage of being impressed that an AI tool can generate a blog title or something like that, or these little kind of micro tools. I think you're probably going to see more specialization in a way of tools that aren't necessarily trying to do everything, but trying to focus on one more niche and more complex problem to solve. If it's like a verticalized problem, or just kind of handling one part of like a job workflow, if it's like SEO or whatever, and trying to handle that and solve that really well, which is in a sense kind of always been the Byword thesis. It's not trying to like do every single thing that an SEO would do, but just doing this one bit of generating content and at scale doing that bit really well. So I think that people, now they're kind of past the wow phase, are looking for kind of where it really adds value, and just focusing on those bits.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some really influential products built in the not too distant future, built with AI. I'm sure you've heard of the Rabbit, which is the hardware product, and that seems interesting. But you also don't know if it's a fad yet or if it's a device that could replace phone use or something like that.
Yeah. This is the sort of voice LLM that you wear, or is it that one?
It's an orange like square thing, and they've called it live action model, large action model, not language model. And so you can train it to do certain actions and like film an action on your computer, and then it can get you to, and then you can get it to do that action itself and things like that, and like order an Uber on your behalf and that type of thing.
Yeah, this stuff is interesting. I think there was it sort of reminds me when plugins first launched on ChatGPT, and there's all this promise about kind of getting put in I want this holiday to Peru or something, and it kind of books everything for you. I think there are often grand predictions around how consumer behavior will change, particularly in regards to like use of technology and kind of use of search and stuff like this. And I think there's a lot more inertia to behavior change than people expect. Like there's so much stuff that you buy and book and do that you just wouldn't want to entrust into the hands of a voice activated model or anything like this. And so it's certainly interesting. I'm a little bit skeptical and on the fence in terms of how wide the adoption of this stuff will be and how many use cases there actually are, as cool as it looks in the demo.
Yeah, because the people that are shouting the loudest about these things are the ones that are already bought in. They're the bottom left of the sort of adoption curve. And it, like, I agree with you, it's going to take a lot more to persuade the majority of people to change the way they do things.
Yeah, I think a sort of a nice example that's not quite at the scale of LLMs and AI, but it's just around voice search and how there are similar predictions, or have been for the last 5-10 years or so, about how voice search is going to change everything and we'll be talking to our phones, and the behavior just hasn't really changed. It's always remained quite a marginal thing. Like, I don't know anyone who uses voice search. The stats are pretty low, and so I'm quite curious as to how much better AI can do than things like this.
Yeah, I agree. And now you're an expert in SEO and marketing and that type of thing. And so on your site, I noticed that there's 3 different signals of social proof, namely the product hunt badge and where you're ranking, the marketers that use your tool, and being featured in certain newsletters. Have these signals helped with the growth of Byword?
I'm actually going to kind of flip that around a bit, which is that. So back when I was like a marketer doing the marketing stuff, I'd be the sort of guy suggesting like, let's put this on the site, let's run the A/B tests, let's measure the uplift, all that sort of stuff. And I remember working with founders and certainly like one friend of mine, he's a founder on his site, and his attitude was always he was always a little bit more blasé, like, if we think it works, let's just put it on, let's not stress about the A/B testing. And it was interesting kind of observing my own mind shift change when it came to Byword. And I'd gone from like, we've got to A/B test everything and like only have the elements that like are justified and lead to like significant uplift or whatever. And like at the end of the day, I'm kind of much more for a sense of intuition. And like if you think something's going to help, put it on. It takes like more resource than you think or than you might expect when there's a million things to do, like setting up and running all these A/B tests. There's some things you just have a pretty good intuition on. And social proof seems like a good thing to have on the site. And I'm happy to put it on there without like justification that's leading to like a 2 or 3% uplift. So I don't know is the honest answer, but it seems like a good thing to have.
Yeah, it does.
I'm sure it's not hurting.
That's why I was intrigued to see if you had noticed, but it makes perfect sense. All three of them are great signals of social proof. And what at the beginning, what was the most useful tool or thing you did to acquire new users?
So in the beginning, before there was like a kind of public version of Byword, well, the first version was kind of like a waiting list landing page, and you would enter like keyword that you wanted an article on and your email, and it would like send you an email a few minutes later with like the HTML of the article, and this was like in exchange for a waitlist sign up. And I think we got, I want to say something like 1,400 people on that waitlist, mostly from just one post on Indie Hackers, which was sort of explaining some of like the projects and stuff I'd done previously. Like it's less exciting to kind of post about AI SEO results now, but this was a few years ago. And so it was certainly quite exciting at the time and got like a big initial bit of traction there, which is also quite motivating, having people sort of get in touch and say like, as soon as you launch this thing, I'm going to buy credits or whatever. So certainly gives like an incentive to get things done and get it shipped. So that was like a big, good early signal. And I mean, the first 6 months or so of Byword were like perfectly good, perfectly happy, nothing kind of crazy. And then it wasn't until late April in 2023 when we had like a really big lift in all the numbers when we started posting with my co-founder on social media and to his LinkedIn following, and we're able to grow a lot of traffic through there, especially because I mean the thing with LinkedIn as a growth tool, it's not just kind of about the numbers and the reach, but the fact that a lot of his followers were within the field of SEO and kind of had SEO jobs or worked at agencies and stuff. So it was a really nice way to kind of reach target market and ICP and get relevant users onto the platform.
Yeah, well, that's an amazing response by one post on Indie Hackers. It's definitely, I'm sure that gives you motivation to keep going. It's a great proof of concept. If you got 1,400 people responding from one post, you know that there's something there.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know what the journey or history would have been like if it weren't for that post, or if it got kind of 10 signups or something, but it might have ended up quite differently. So it was probably quite lucky there.
Yeah. And you mentioned your co-founder. Was he there from the beginning, or how did you guys join together and work on this?
Yes, the full story is we met a kind of few years ago, or met virtually. Back when I was contracting, there was a brand where I was doing the ads for them. He was doing the SEO. We didn't really kind of, we're kind of working in our own separate spheres, didn't talk too much, but talked about a few things and kind of general entrepreneurial type ideas and stuff like that. Maybe saw a kindred spirit there. And then he left that brand. I left, or it might have been before I left, and I was kind of playing around with AI and SEO, and I was far from an SEO expert. He was the expert, but I'd sort of had some good results in terms of using AI on some of these client projects. And so was very curious for his take, in particular curious whether he would sort of think, oh, this is really cool, or if he would sort of roll his eyes at using AI to sort of automate that field. But he was really interested. So once the product got launched, he sort of just did as a little experiment, a kind of a post or two about it, and that drove, and this was sort of January 2023, that drove like a bunch of new users and saw really good response. I think better response than he was expecting. And so yeah, shortly after that, we kind of formalized an agreement. He became a kind of co-founder and is the only other person involved kind of day to day in the business.
Awesome. That's a great story. And when building Byword and while running it over the last year and a half, have you run into any challenges so far?
Yeah, there's probably a few to talk about. So I guess the main one actually is, and this is definitely like a kind of good problem and a good challenge to have, but definitely when he got properly involved and the volume and everything kind of ramped up a lot around the end of April, early May, just the sheer kind of volume of interest and of users, which is obviously great in a lot of ways and not complaining at all, but certainly going from like, I don't know, 1 or 2 customer support tickets a day to a point where like in the time it takes you to respond to one of them, there's like 2 more popped up. And, inevitably that there's always going to be bugs and you can't fix the bugs because you're so busy responding to people about the bugs that it just doesn't get fixed. So it's definitely a very stressful time in that sense, dealing with all the kind of the interests. It's also kind of funny because when you start off building something, you see your job as just building the thing. Like that's all you kind of see it as. And then in this kind of relatively short period, you sort of get thrust into a number of different roles of doing like sales and customer support and all this stuff, which is fun and exciting, but it's also quite different from kind of what you had in mind. So it's an interesting challenge kind of adapting to that. Also, yeah, it's always like fun and interesting dealing with kind of customers and people that kind of want to talk to you about the product. Like most of the feedback is very positive and people are very nice, but also it's that kind of classic negativity bias thing of when if you'll get kind of 3 people say like, this is great, love the product. But if you get one person that's very unhappy with it, then that kind of sticks in your mind a lot more. So I think especially going from like a sort of nice sustainable volume to like much larger numbers in a short period of time was definitely a struggle dealing with that as well also.
Yeah, I'm sure. And in terms of the feedback, is it difficult at times to almost not take all the feedback on board and like pick the bits that are actually useful and that you can apply? Because I'm sure everyone has their own opinion on like the direction Byword can go or like a new feature, and that I'm sure that can get a lot and you can't deliver on all of those.
Yeah. I think there's a balance to be found in terms of like what you do on data and what you do just on gut feel. So there's a few things in the product where like on the integrations page, there's a list of integrations and then there's a box for requesting new ones. And it's sort of like a free form entry, but we have some like tech on the back end that sort of aggregates this into different groups. So we have a good sense of like what integrations and what like CMSs Byword customers are using. And also if you sign up with like a custom domain, like a non-Gmail domain, we ping off an API request to kind of check your site and what CMS you're using. So there's an interesting sense there in terms of like, in that small example of like what integrations do we focus on, which we build there. And then similarly, there's like a sort of advanced features part of the product where we have like all the ones that are built and you kind of vote on the ones below. So using that data as well to kind of prioritize. But I think also you'll always just kind of get kind of custom requests and things from users in emails or DMs or whatever. And I think at some point you just have to make a bit of a gut feel call in terms of like how useful would this be overall? Is this useful just to this user? Is it useful to a lot? There's also, in terms of comparing Byword to like a lot of other AI article writers out there, a lot of them are focused on I'd say kind of smaller scale article writing. So it's writing 1, 2, or 3 articles, and they often have like a big focus on like editing loops of like being able to say to an AI like, okay, I want to change this about the article, etc. And Byword's always been much more focused on delivering at scale. So it's always trying to weigh up like, okay, this is a cool feature and this would be really good, but it kind of only makes sense if you're like looking at articles on like a very small scale. And so a lot of the features that we do build are things that apply to any scale as well, because that certainly helps serve a lot more users and like some of the more serious SEO use cases.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what has been the best part of it all so far?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a few. So I think just like on a personal level, it feels great kind of taking a bet on something and having it it pay off. Similarly, on a personal level, it's not just the flexibility, but also it's fun building stuff. It's fun knowing that you kind of have, like, in a sense, a guaranteed audience for things that you build. So it's the difference of, like, if you're building something from scratch, knowing that, maybe if you post about this on Indie Hackers, you'll get some response, maybe you won't. But it's quite motivating and stressful for different reasons, knowing that, when you're building a new feature, this will go out to a mailing list of, like, however many tens of thousands of people. So definitely increases the pressure in some ways, but it's also quite motivating knowing that, like, people will see this, people will use it. So that's kind of exciting in its own ways. That, and also, I think one experience I found very cool is just when you have users that you sort of never talked to or interacted with, so users who are completely self-serve, who'll, like, go away, sign up to the product, use it a bunch, and then one way or another, either because they get in contact, like, a few months later or through something else, maybe just kind of look in the database randomly or something, you, like, look at their traffic and it's sort of hockey sticked up and they've seen really good results. So it's nice to feel like you've built something that has, like, allowed a user in a completely self-serve way to go and, like, achieve some goals without use of hand-holding them or anything like that. So it's kind of all just them and the product.
Yeah, that's great. And did you always see yourself as an entrepreneur?
Not really. I think maybe there'd always been sort of ambitions or goals, like, in the back of my head. I think it's probably much more a product of, like, there's a sort of cliche phrase or saying that you're, like, the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and either by coincidence or something else, just happen to, like, spend a lot of time around and have a lot of friends who are in that sort of space and doing similarly entrepreneurial things. And so, like, yeah, there's never like a sort of pressure, but it's sort of hard not to, when you're in that space, to not, like, have your own ideas as well. So I think it came from that rather than, like, always growing up and wanting to do this or something like that.
Yeah, that's such a great motivator compared to, like, a normal 9 to 5. It's a completely different type of motivator where taking that leap is more fearful and you're not driven and forced to think of new ideas because everyone's doing the comfortable thing. So, like, I agree that average of the 5 people around you is such a great, although it is cliche, it's a great frame to think through.
Yeah, it means that sort of, like, going and starting something doesn't, as you say, doesn't feel like a huge leap of faith. It just feels like something you do at one point in your life. It's just, like, part of the process, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And from your experience so far, what do you think the one thing that all entrepreneurs need to have is?
I think there's probably there's a few answers here. I think a pretty good sense of, like, when to trust your gut. I think that, yeah, there's some things that you can't really rationalize if it's, like, your decision to, like, really go in on something or to, like, take a particular direction of the product or just to start it in the first place. I think some of those decisions can't fully be rationalized and, like, you just have to go with your gut feeling. And it's definitely, like, first of all, it's easier said than done to just, like, trust your instinct on something like this. But also knowing when it's, like, coming from the right places and when it's not, it's definitely a hard thing and sort of builds up over time, like, once you get more confidence. This feels like a kind of wishy-washy answer, but I also feel like it's the most honest one in this sense.
Yeah, I agree. You build that intuition over time, and so although it seems like you're just acting on gut feel, that gut feel is actually based on something you've learned over time, and so it's an educated guess rather than just guessing.
Yeah, and I think maybe similarly sort of understanding your own biases. So, like, I came from a performance marketing or ads background, and I think one way in which that's been weirdly helpful is it makes you massively cynical about, like, human behavior. Like, the number of times you'll be in sort of meetings where you're, like, drafting ad strategy or something, and people are like, oh yeah, people who see these ads are going to love this, and, like, this will resonate with them, and click through and blah blah and convert. And, like, 9 times out of 10 it doesn't happen, and people are just, like, fundamentally much less inclined to, like, behave as you want them to than you would expect. Like, people don't really care about your product or whatever you're advertising unless there's a huge incentive to. And I think, like, that cynicism's it's not necessarily good or bad, but it's like good for me to know that I have that sort of cynicism coming from like an ads background, because it meant that when I felt like pretty convinced about starting Byword, taking that cynicism into account meant that like, okay, this is probably definitely the thing to do if like it's gotten to this level. And I feel like this is, even if I'm 50-50 on the fence, my 50-50 is maybe like in reality like a definite sign I should do this thing. So kind of understanding your attitudes and like how cynical or optimistic or pessimistic you are, and like factoring that into your decision making.
Yeah, I think a lot of founders fall into that trap where they believe that what they're working on is the thing they should be working on, and they're going to get hundreds of thousands of customers because they think it's the right thing. But doing something like you did where you got 1,400 signups, it sort of validates that idea, and it's not just in your head anymore. And I think founders need to apply those sort of tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And the work that went into building that landing page that got those signups and that validation was pretty slim. Like it's pretty easy to validate and just not kind of commit too much to. If you get that signal, then you go all in, and if you don't, then you kind of keep going at it or pivot.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a tricky one, but what have you changed your mind about in the last few years, and why?
Yeah, I guess possibly one thing is that I mean, like in terms of starting something or doing a startup or whatever, there's like a lot of different ways to go about it and different sort of end goals. And like you'll often hear about people sort of raising huge amounts of funds and like going the sort of big VC backed way. And I think it's certainly quite easy to feel like that's the default path or like the way you should do things. And I sort of, like the way I'd gone about things with Byword, I mentioned earlier this Nat Friedman stuff and the grants there, which in some way is like a first small step down that route of getting funding and getting that route. But certainly with the early validation and also the fact that like building on AI, especially sort of this type of B2B SaaS, is quite easy from like a cash flow perspective and getting started, maybe led me to question some of those things and wonder if there's a way of doing it where it's just basically you're all kind of bootstrapped and the pressure isn't sort of growth at all costs, but to kind of build like a nice sustainable revenue basis with good lean financial structure. So it's definitely been quite eye-opening in terms of like different ways of approaching things and the benefits of doing things in like a more efficient bootstrapped way versus just trying to grow revenue as aggressively as possible. So that's been I don't know if that's my mind changed, but certainly my eyes opened in that way.
Yeah, I think that perception of funding is starting to change quite a bit, especially after the last few years. Like the AI boom was sort of coinciding with a lot of other companies being valued at a lot less than what they were when they acquired funding. And it creates a very different dynamic because obviously VCs need the valuation of company to keep increasing, or else it destroys the cap table and everything about it. And so bootstrapping your business and also not giving away equity in your business and you hold it all makes that exit a lot more beneficial for you than if you were to give away so many pieces of business just to keep going and be beholden to shareholders.
Yeah. I think there's also, I sort of wondered around people's intentions in some cases for raising cash in the first place. There's certainly some ideas and kind of use cases where you just need capital, you need to build a team and go aggressively. I also wonder whether there's ideas of, I don't know if ego is the right term here, or just like identity or validation for like raising capital. Like it doesn't sound very cool at parties when I say, I just built like the old AI SEO thing in my spare time, and no, we haven't got any funding or anything like that. So I sometimes wonder around like other personal reasons for going the sort of venture-backed or funding route.
Yeah, that's true. And what are your goals for Byword going forward?
Yeah, sure. So kind of tying on some things earlier, like the goal with Byword has always just been to do one thing and to do that thing really well. And so in short, the answer is to do that one thing even better and better and better. There's a lot of cool stuff that I think speaks to some of these ideas of like specialization and just trying to be really good at this one thing. So by the time it's come out, we've probably launched the feature that I've been working on for the longest time, for like 6 months in the background, which is basically trying to emulate user writing styles, which I think is really exciting in terms of like, further bridging the gap between what you can do with AI and what you can do with a human. So being able to kind of look at a user site, take inspiration from that content and write it in the same sort of style and way and structure that they would themselves. There's, I think, a much larger piece, which certainly needs some thinking on my end, but a lot of really cool stuff in terms of like writing articles around custom data sets, to put it in like an abstract way. So this could be like, I've done some project work to do kind of writing articles around product catalogs. Lots of brands just have interesting data in the first place. There's like loads of really cool articles to write on, and that's kind of like proprietary stuff that they have that maybe their competitors don't. So it's just a really interesting use case. And I think, yeah, would certainly set Byword quite far apart from some of the competitors. There's a lot of thinking being done there. And then also like another way that I tend to think about Byword is in an ideal world, like it requires absolutely no SEO expertise. You just have to be someone who wants to get traffic to their site. And so the ideal world looks something a bit like you come along, you sign up. Maybe we don't even kind of ask for your domain because we just look at it from the email. We say, hey, this is like, these are the themes of your site. These are not just the keywords you think you should be ranking on, but also maybe the like programmatic SEO structures, which are kind of like keyword templates that you should be kind of producing articles for, and then kind of pitches you like, okay, here's the first project, here's the second project, this is a good glossary for you or whatever. And so like it is a sort of complete end-to-end solution in the sense where you just come along with your domain, and then Byword handles like the strategy, but the writing, and then also the implementation of putting it onto the site as well. So really just kind of streamlines the whole process and doesn't require any knowledge or expertise. Would be is sort of one way I think about the sort of end solution.
That's amazing and very exciting, because I don't have much knowledge in SEO, so I definitely need a solution like that. So before we end, I usually hand over the mic and ask if you have a question for me.
Yeah, sure. So I'm kind of curious, as someone who's interviewed a bunch of founders now, do you have any preconceptions going into this about, I don't know, maybe what you thought founders would be like, or their journeys, or just anything? Yeah, I guess you asked me earlier in terms of things that I've changed my mind on, and this is sort of throwing that back in terms of things that you've learned or things that you've been surprised or wrong about.
Yeah, I think over the journey of starting it, because it's been quite a while now, my perception has changed quite a bit, because I initially started it because I didn't really understand. Like there was a disconnect because I thought there were fears involved, and like I was scared to take the leap, and so I wanted to understand that aspect of it. And then as it's progressed, my questioning has sort of gone in a slightly different direction, as I've understood that there's small, minute differentiators between a founder and, say, someone who wants to be a founder but isn't one yet because they're being held back by certain social conditioning and that type of thing. And most of them have taken like small incremental steps to get there, to get over those fears. They've noticed them within themselves, and they've been proactive about changing their minds and changing the way they do things. And that's a very common trait that I've noticed. And so I've kind of stopped asking about that and started going deeper into like why they do what they do and that type of thing. And I'm sure my questioning will develop and change over time, depending on the questions I'm curious about and want to learn as I progress in this journey. But it was really eye-opening at the beginning for me to realize that there's actually not that much of a difference. I think I put founders more up on a pedestal when I started. That's not to say that you're not amazing at what you do. It's just that it was really helpful for me to realize that and make that connection. So it's a more achievable goal for me in the not too distant future.
Yeah, no, totally. Makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me today, Mack. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for sharing your journey and everything about Byword. Before you go, if people want to find out more about you and Byword, where can they do so?
Yeah, byword.ai is the domain, or just Google Byword on Google. Yeah, I have a not very regularly updated personal site under mackgrenfell.com as well, or LinkedIn is probably a better way.
Okay, perfect. Great. I'll put those links in the show notes. Thanks for joining me today, Mack. Really appreciate it. Chat soon.
Thanks a lot for having me on. Good to chat.
Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.